So we can have a look at the plate boundaries a little bit closer here and kind of see what happens exactly. So if we think about our first example here, and that is a convergent plate boundary, so that is when the tectonic plates meet together. What can happen if you have two bits of continental plate, 50 kilometers thick, well, they'll run into each other, and they'll squish each other, and they'll push tectonic plate, they'll push plate up, and actually form mountains. Other things that can happen if you have a smaller oceanic plate which kind of converges on a continental plate, then the oceanic plate can slip underneath, or it can subduct underneath the continental plate. And when this solid rock, solid crust ends up going down underneath, down here, it actually melts. And that can result in the formation of volcanoes. Divergent plate boundaries, when they move apart like this, well, what happens then is the magma in the mantle just underneath them rises up, so hot things rise up, and that will then cool down to form new rock, to form new crust in between those two divergent plate boundaries. So it's kind of creating new crust, so it's a constructive plate boundary. And the last one over here is, of course, this transform plate boundary. So we have convergent moving together, divergent moving apart, and a transform plate boundary happens when two plates slide past one another. And what happens when they slide past one another is sometimes they can, they'll slide past, and sometimes they can get stuck. And they're really big, they're really heavy, but they'll keep moving, and they get a little bit stuck, and then eventually that stuck, they'll slip past one another, and that big slip is felt as an earthquake. So when the ground really kind of shakes quite fast, that happens when in a transform plate boundary, when the plates slide past each other, and then they get stuck, and then they get unstuck, and there's a big slip occurs. And transform plate boundaries, you can also form like a fault line in between the two tectonic plates. So I've got an example over here of a fault line. So this is the San Andreas Fault, which is in California. So you can see this is the line between two tectonic plates, and they're sliding past each other, and it causes all these cracks, big cracks in the earth around it, which is just amazing. There's another plate boundary, kind of here between the two. This might be a minor plate boundary, but you can see that these two plates, one of them, the one on the right, it was obviously moving slightly. It got a little bit stuck. So as it moved up a little bit, it got a little bit curved down there. So they were moving past each other some way. One moved up slightly, but because it got a bit stuck, it kind of curved just a little bit here. So you got all these little curvy bits of rock because they obviously got stuck right on this boundary. So as this part of the plate moved up, these little bits of plate got stuck and ended up curving down. So that's all about plate boundaries. They can either be convergent, and destructive to make mountains and volcanoes. They can diverge and be constructive to make new crust when magma comes up, or they can slip past each other as a transform plate boundary, and that's when you get earthquakes. So it's all about plate boundaries, and they're really interesting.